Welcome, my friend, to Next Level Change Success, a change conversation for leaders, project and change practitioners for today and tomorrow. My name is Therese Perez of myvirtualchangemanager.com, and I'm an experienced change and project professional and people leader with many years of experience in the industry. I love business, and I love the people side of business especially. So nothing lights me up more than seeing people use change management, project management, and strong change leadership to engage, motivate, and inspire people, and ultimately transform organisations. If you've heard about change management and have no idea of what it involves, then you're in the right place. If you know about change management, but you want to take your practices to the next level, then this is where you should be. I'm going to share the stories of my experiences, interview some fantastic people, and I'm going to explore all of the challenges and opportunities that you face in organisations right now. So please join me and let's go and have some fun. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Next Level Change Success. My name is Therese Perez and I am the founder of myvirtualchangemanager.com. And I'd like to acknowledge before I begin that I'm recording on Tharawal country and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which I am recording. Well, in the last week, it has been a big week globally. The American elections have taken place and Donald Trump was successful in achieving the presidency of the United States of America. And what I wanted to talk about was not necessarily politics, but what I wanted to talk about was the lessons and the observations, even at this time, that we can have about when you introduce a change and the level of emotional response that you can get to that change. And one of the biggest changes in organizations that you can bring in, obviously, that has a strong emotive response, are structure changes, because it threatens people's very livelihood. Now, within an organization, you would expect that when it comes to structure changes, and nothing different, even if it's a positive step forward, even if it's something that someone's been waiting for a long period of time. There will always be an emotional roller coaster associated with any structure change because of the need for people to have job security, obviously to feed their families at the very basics, but also they might have mortgages and other commitments that they need to make. And so from a change perspective, sometimes when you introduce change, you get such an emotional backlash or an emotional response that you may not be expecting it. And what I want to talk about today was when you have such emotional turmoil, how do you handle that from a change perspective? Whether you're a leader, whether you're a business manager, a middle manager who's just simply introducing change into your team, part of what you need to expect is that you will have an emotive response to any change. Sometimes it's unexpected. Sometimes it could just be a certain team member having a bad day who has quite a reactive response, which has nothing to do with the change itself, but has to do with something going on in their life. But the change just seems to trigger them and they let loose. These are the things that you need to know as whether it be, as I said, a people leader, change manager, change catalyst in an organization, that these things happen and you should also expect it. Expect the unexpected, I say, when it comes to change. In the change community, the biggest joke is that change will be easy, except it involves people. It's so true in its fundamentals is that people may even want change, but they may not want to change. And isn't it ironic, as Alanis Morissette said, that you would want change, but you don't want to change the way you do things or how you approach things, or you don't want the change to impact you, but you want things to be different. Now, when it comes to change and the world of change, if you're leading or you're managing change, there's some things that you can do to help the emotional roller coaster be a bit of a smoother ride. The first area of this is about leadership presence and being able to read when it's appropriate that leaders are available, but also to create the space for team members to what I call decompress. And sometimes I talk about setting up a decompression session so that people can vocalize and process the emotions that sit with them. And this can happen when obviously there's team changes. I say immediately after you're going to announce it, it is then good to break into, if you're at a departmental level, break into certain teams with their people leader, just to say, okay, has anyone got any questions off the back of this that I can take back? How's everyone feeling? Bit of a checkpoint. I think it's appropriate to ask the question how people are feeling. I think one of the biggest things and missteps that people can make is not to have a session like that, is to avoid engaging. It's kind of like tell them and then we run for the hills and we don't go and engage to hear how people are feeling, or to get feedback about either the process or about what's being proposed. And then it's also important to continue to regroup. And sometimes it's a thing of gauging what the noise is like amongst the teams, or the general conversations and water cooler conversations that are happening, but also having regular checkpoints in place, whether people would like to take you up on them or not, but just having the space and creating the space is really important, so that essentially the emotional contagion that can take place, and that's where people just continually are riling each other up, because there isn't any engagement which helps diffuse the situation, that just keeps compounding and can get into hysteria. So it's important to actually engage with the emotion versus pretend like it's not happening. And I certainly know through my career, I'm sure you have had the same instance through your career, where you have showed up to something and there's this story being told which isn't the reality of what's happening on the ground or the sentiment that's happening on the ground, and where people seem almost delusional with how they're saying, how fantastic it is, everyone's on board, we're moving forward, to almost alienate those and make those who are seeming and struggling with the change, for them to feel like they're being a bit ridiculous in their behaviour, which in turn doesn't validate how they feel. And I think one of the important things that I always think is important for type of change that you're bringing in, people tend to argue with the emotion that gets expressed, and it's about not arguing or trying to take on that argument, not try and justify, not try and over-deliver or over-promise, and not try and overcompensate for the emotion that's getting thrown at you. It's just very important to acknowledge that the emotion's there, and then keep focused on what the day-to-day is and where the journey is heading, so that people can make choices. And it's just reminding people that they have a choice. And it will get to a point through your change where, and I don't like the terminology of like, are you on the bus? Are you off the bus? You're coming with us? Are you with us or are you against us? It's actually about that there is an appropriate amount of time that people can take to process, and then momentum will carry you forward. And at that point, if people are still struggling with it, then potentially they may need to make another choice for their own good and for the benefit of the organisation. And that normally happens after a couple of weeks. If you're looking at a major transformation program, that's normally about a month after, the announcements happened, changes are starting to come through. If people are still trying to arc up against that change, then the conversation, and I think most people, leaders, would know this, when it gets to a point in the conversation where it's like, look, if you're not happy, that's okay. I can help you find another role somewhere else, or you may choose to go somewhere else, but this is where we're headed. And so choices have to be made. And I think that's really important, because you don't want someone to be in discomfort in an enduring way about a change. So important that these things are addressed, acknowledged, and it just helps everyone move forward. And I think that's really powerful. So a leadership presence can be leaders obviously turning up into the office, leaders setting up forums, whether they be virtual, hybrid, in person, for people to engage with them, proactively bringing their team together to talk about the change itself and continually move the conversation forward, but also to answer questions that get raised. And I think that's one of these things that is really important. If you don't know the answer to the question, you say, I don't know it, I'll try and find it, or I don't know and we're not going to know for a number of months. But it has to be addressed. It has to be acknowledged that there's a question, and it might be, I don't know actually how this is going to go, nor do I know some of the functions that our team's going to take on. However, we're going to move forward with it, and that will be something we workshop through this change. That's a way of answering the question. It's actually about bringing certainty into a space of uncertainty. Another key tactic when looking at change is also, if you're looking at basic process change, is to reference for people what stays the same. And I talk about this a lot, about change full stop, let alone when there's a big emotive response. Part of it is to acknowledge the emotive response and then to reassure people that there are things that haven't changed. Definitely, if that's the case, it might be that actually we're still doing the same job, we're just doing it a different way. You'll still be looking at the systems and processes that you're undertaking, but what we want to focus on is high value tasks rather than low value day-to-day tasks, which is why we're moving those out of this particular team. Or you might say that the low value day-to-day tasks will be dealt with a chatbot or via AI. However, every day you're still going to be interacting with customers, clients, whoever that may be. So part of it is that reassurance of what still remains the same. The team will still be the same. Your leader's still the same. It's just we're doing different tasks, or, we're combining teams as part of this process. So, we'll still be working with the same people. We're just in the same division. Those type of things, if you can hear the vernacular with that, that is very much about referencing what stays the same. So if you're working on a change right now, obviously the why is important, but also say what is changing and what isn't changing. And that's part of giving people a little bit of certainty in a time where things are changing and they might feel a little bit unsettled with that. When it comes to the emotive response as well, something to talk about most definitely is about how when you're turning up to a meeting, and I've had this, probably too much in my career sometimes. We're working on major transformations, but it's important that you take care of yourself. It's a little bit ironic. I have a bit of a cold at the moment, but definitely important to make sure that when you're heading into a forum where there is a really big change happening, that you are very clear in yourself. I would say do not drink the night before. Definitely make sure you get enough sleep the night before. It will probably be a disrupted sleep if there's a big event or a big forum that you're holding or presenting at, or if there's a big change for your team that you're going to have the conversation with them about. But it's important to really take care of your health and well-being, because when emotion gets thrown at you, gets expressed to you, sometimes you can take that on board. And one of the biggest things is to ensure that you have clear boundaries and that you don't start to blur those in being someone who continually is a bit of I've talked about this before, but an agony aunt. In the old days, they talked about agony aunts, which are people who like write into and write their woes to. And that's not very productive for people. It's very disempowering for them, and it's disempowering for you. And as a change leader or someone who's introducing change, it is really important to have that boundary where you can relate to people, but you're not going to blur and agonize too much with the individual. So you could be empathetic 1000%. It's really important you have a sense of caring, but you cannot save nor rescue people through the change process. Everyone has to make a choice. And so important that you can listen. And when it comes to the power of listening, being centered in yourself and not being knocked over by the emotions will allow you to hear if there are particular issues or things that you actually need to address as part of the change. So not really engaging in the emotion of how the message is delivered, but certainly listening as to what the message is, because that person may be trying to highlight something to you as to why that change won't work. And what can happen based on people's personal biases, or if you're a person and a change practitioner who's heard it where people say that won't work here, part of it is unpacking why people legitimately don't think it will work, so that you can make sure that you've addressed each of those issues. Sometimes people are trying to highlight that there's systems, technical aspects, which are going to inhibit progress. And what can happen if someone's heard that story before, they're going to dismiss the message or the feedback that they've been receiving to their own detriment. And this is really key, that you need to be centered, you need to listen. And to listen well, you also need to ensure that you don't engage with the emotion, but you can hear what people are actually saying. And that's going to get the best outcome for the change. It's going to get the best outcome for the organisation and potentially for the individual, because sometimes people can become quite emotive if their job's threatened, but they also know their stuff. And I think that's part of the level of listening that you need to have, is understanding that sometimes people don't know how to convey the messages, and sometimes they can become quite emotive in conveying the messages, but the message itself is important. So think about that from an emotional perspective. If you're getting quite a strong response, is just always make sure that you do capture the feedback, and that you do have a bit of a listening for, has this been addressed? Or is this something we need to address when it comes to the change? Because will it fundamentally compromise the outcome that you're trying to achieve? When also looking at the emotional reactions and responses, one key element is not to take it personally. Now, I haven't always done this well, that's for sure. I think over time, as you mature, you become a little bit more resilient to emotions that can get thrown at you. And I think it is really important that you remind yourself that even if people do start to take it to a personal space, that it's not personal. Your organization's dynamics on how people play out, different personalities sometimes clash, and that can be something that people really do react to if they don't align with your values. And if you're a change leader and you're wanting to move things forward, I could sit in judgment about whether I think some people would take things forward in a productive way or a not productive way. But the reality is the change is happening. Even if the organisation is going down a path that you don't agree with, it's really just about understanding that if you're a leader, you don't take it personally. And if someone decides to go down the personal path, then that you don't head down that path as well. That you're not responding or you're not reacting in a way where you're taking it personally and then trying to be vindictive for the people. This is about ensuring that change moves forward and that it moves forward in the most productive way that you can. And that means stay away from the ego and do not be vindictive in any way, shape or form, because that is probably the lowest path that you could take. So if you are a leader of change currently and you're getting really plugged in by the reactions of your people, shake it off. This is just part of leadership, and it's about who you want on your team or who you want to move forward with you, and making sure that they're aware that it's a choice for them to be there or not. But this is how you run the team, and this is how you want to move forward. And these things are really, really important. And oftentimes it's not just in a moment of change that these things can come up. So sometimes it can come up in the day-to-day. Actually, most of the time it probably will. So change is just another catalyst for possibly a bigger expression of that through an emotional reaction. As a leader, you want to make sure the person feels acknowledged. However, you don't have to put up with anyone kind of projecting anything personally. And it's important to say that I'm talking from experience. I absolutely have had it where people have named my names and things, have written to people, have complained about various things when you're working through a major change or transformation. And it does affect you personally because we're human, yet it is important to build up that resilience, which is really critical because it's what actually allows you to move forward and to deliver bigger and bigger changes. And know that when you're doing it with the right intent, when you're doing it with respect and introducing change with respect, then you can't take on that emotion or start to get into a personal debate. And you can't even try and justify or say, I'm not that type of person. The reality is people will always have opinions of you, regardless of what you're doing. And to be honest, in any walk of life, people will always make up their own story and their own interpretation of what you're doing. You just need to know if you do it with personal integrity, then you can sleep at night. It's as simple as that. So we've talked about the leadership presence. We've talked about the need to create space for decompression. We've talked about don't take it personally. But I also think it is really important to highlight that if you're going to do a significant change or do something where there is that strong emotive reaction or people will feel threatened through the change process, that proper supports are in place for people. And most organisations have an employee assistance program or something similar where there might be counselling available. You may want to bring counsellors in at the time that you're making a big change. You might want to bring career counsellors, coaches in if you're looking at restructuring an organisation so that people could go independently to a source for some support or some counsel. And I think the independence aspect is really, really important in this, because it really does matter that people would have a confidential place to go to vent or to get some coaching or get some counsel to help them through different major changes. And they're just nice value add pieces. And they're also, well, I say value add, I take that back. These are kind of fundamentals that you would support your people in that way. And it will show whether the leadership care or whether the organisation cares, the quality and calibre of the support, and the willing to invest in support for your people at that time. And I think that's really, really important. The other thing is to allow for people to connect, to give them a bit more time to connect during times of change as well. I talked about decompression, but also just facilitating that sense of community is important for a period of time. And then it gets back to, well, let's focus on business is the important thing as well, and the movement forward. So a very big balancing act as you go through a transformation. But if you're introducing and walking people through the transformation process, it really is something that you want to make sure those avenues are there, that you really have your finger on the pulse, formally and informally, about the concerns and the sentiment across the organisation, so that you can continue to put in further change responses, further support mechanisms to help people through that change as such. And sometimes it does, when it comes to decision making or when you're highlighting, this is the feedback we're receiving, is ensuring that that bias, which I talked about before, that can come up for people around personal bias, from those who might be in leadership positions as well, that you're kind of coaching and counselling those leadership levels as well around that this is normal. It is very much something you should expect if you're putting in place a change or transformation, having people react to it emotionally and respond to it, and to be able to move through the change process. It's not a reason to change the approach you're taking unless you're finding that it is not productive at all, and that you need to put in place some other sessions or some other way to engage people who are being impacted by the change for it to be more appropriate or for it to be more effective. And you're only going to know that as you go through the change process. And that is where change experts and having a change manager or someone who has gone and implemented a similar change come into your organisation to support with it, if it is of such a magnitude that you're expecting a bit of volatility, it is good, because then they can provide that counsel as to whether further investment needs to be made or if change in tact needs to actually be introduced to be able to connect and move people through the change cycle. I hope some of this helps. I know that it's been a bit of a volatile world of late. Certainly 2024 has had many, many ups and downs globally. This is the impact of globalization. We're all connected. And I think it is really interesting to reflect and observe what is happening across the world, but also think within an organizational context, how does this also play out? So I hope you have some activities you might want to undertake, things you may want to consider or reflect on in relation to a change that you're introducing, or in relation to a change you're starting to plan for, around how you are going to resource, how you're going to get the right supports in place for your people. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. This is something I could talk about for a very, very long time. It was one of a longer episode because of that. Come and join us at myvirtualchangemanager.com to continue the change conversation. We're looking to interrupt the conversation about change so that it can be seen to be a positive thing. And if you would like to subscribe to our newsletter, come to our website, sign up, stay in touch, because we have bigger and better things happening all the time at myvirtualchangemanager.com. So come join the change conversation. And change matters because your people matter.